Hello humans, hello humans. It's 3:27 p.m. on August 21. And I've got a little time, and I wanted to discuss some aspects of time because it's pertinent to where we're at in time and will be impacting us in due time. All right, so the other day I tweeted out a link to this interview with a guy who's a philosopher. He's Persian. He's a sharp-dressed man, had just a great tie, and he was discussing a lot of sort of woo subjects. And he's a youngish fellow. His perspective was unexpected, deep in some areas, but then he's got all these cul-de-sacs that he just had not explored deep enough, or his age prevented him from seeing other layers or some other cause, and they weren't explored. So it was kind of like, oh, that's a glaring hole, so to speak, in the logic of his position for this particular reason, right? And one of the things he had said was that all this shit we find in coal, lumps of coal, all the, artifacts, and sometimes they're digging down for coal or gold or something, and they come across, ruins that shouldn't be there, buried underground hundreds of feet, etc., etc. So the anomalies of our archaeological understanding of our supposed history when applied to the pablum that's been dribbled out by the Elohim worship cult over the last several hundreds of years. Anyway, and so that was one of the things I wanted to discuss, was time and his understanding, because he had actually said that it was his conclusion that the yugas didn't exist, and that these out-of-place artifacts, these oops, are the result of time-traveling humans. Which is a silly premise on many different levels, and it is very easily disproven. All time travel is easily disproven if you apply energy math to the question. So just like Buckminster Fuller, even Boscovich, they were all into energy understanding of what was going on, Tesla, etc., right? It's all about energy. And it takes a lot of energy, for instance, to shift your frequencies, especially if you do it in such a way as, because you're bear in mind that the beat of your heart, the flow of lymph system, the circulating melanin, your thoughts even, are dependent upon the frequency of your body at all times. Okay, and so in that sense, that frequency of your individual body, which is like no other body, although it shares characteristics that are similar to all other bodies, and has a lot more in common with some other bodies than others, nonetheless, your vibrational signature is unique and can be thought of as, let's put air quotes around it, your clock speed or your timing chip. Okay? And so some people have a naturally faster vibration than others. You find this frequently demonstrated in Tennessee Williams' plays. In plays about the South and Northerners going through the South, right? Especially in the Depression era kind of thing. Anyway, so clock speeds are variant. Anyway, he was under this guy Jason Georgiani. He's a Persian extract. The link to the interview is in my feed. He's of the opinion that, time-traveling humans ensconced in Antarctica go about and they put remnants of, they live in various times and they want to live well, so they basically import technology and do things that is out of time for that era. It gets wrapped up eventually by geological processes and ends up in a lump of coal. And it's like, well, there's a whole lot of other explanations for things like that. But one of the reasons that he concludes this begins with the idea that he has of the traditional understanding from the Hindu perspective, carried by 2 or 3 Maharishis who weren't all that rishi, in my opinion. Their traditional understanding of the yugas as being these vastly long ages of hundreds of thousands of years, which is not the case. The yugas, so I'm saying that maybe it was his age, maybe he doesn't do as in-depth the research as he thinks, but he'd obviously never come across Yuktesvar and the as well as his supposition as to how they occur or why, what is the astrological or astronomical dynamic, and then the length of time involved in all of these, right? And so Yuktesvar showed, and Yuktesvar had proof of his premise by premonition, so to speak, by forecast. So Yuktesvar was this mathematician yogi in India. He forecast that the Kali Yuga, the ascending Kali Yuga, which we just left, that we left it, he said, in the year 1700, and I dispute that slightly because of the nature of the math involved, and I just say 1699, but I'm willing to accept 1700 AD, right? He says that's when we left the Kali Yuga and entered the Bronze Age, the Dwapara Yuga, the ascending one. And I agree that within a year of that time, we did indeed leave the Kali Yuga and we did indeed move into the Bronze Age, to this ascending Bronze Age. And now we have even more proof of it because we're going through the other aspects of that transitional cycle, and these are at least demonstrable or presumed demonstrable through the actions of humanity going batshit crazy in this shift of the ages, right? There's various different tells for these shifts in these greater periods of energy. And we now have a more rational explanation, which is rising up out of the obscuring mass of the galactic center to get more energy from galactic center in the course of these sinusoidal motions in our orbit around the great galactic center. Okay, and so Yuktesvar noted mathematics that produced yugas, and everything is based on 1200 years. And so you just basically split the cycle in half, and you have four chunks in each half. So there's 8 pieces, so to speak. But what you look at is this. The Kali Yuga, the worst part, the Dark Ages, is 1200 years long. The ascending as well as descending portions of it. So that's a total of 2400 years. But just taking one half of that, the ascending part we just left, and that ascending is used to describe us going up into galactic center emanations at a higher level, and we peak in the golden age and then we come back down, right? And the golden ages last quite a long length of time because of the nature of this giant arc that our solar system makes around the outside edge of this third minor spiral arm of the Milky Way galaxy. And when we rise up high enough, we get more of these emanations, which is happening now. So the Kali Yuga, the ascending Kali Yuga, is 1200 years long. Now the next age, the Bronze Age, you just take 1200 and add to that. So the Bronze Age we're in now is 2400 years. And it began by Yuktesvar's notation in the year 1700. So you can add 2400 years to that and on you go. And then the next age is the Treta Age, which is the Silver Age. And it is got another 1200, so it's 3600 years long. So the Silver Age you start getting into some serious, serious time involved in there. And then for the golden age that follows it, you add another 1200, so that the ascending golden age is 4,800 years long. But get this, instantly in the peak of the ascending golden age, you start down on the descending side, and so you go into the descending golden age. So you're descending, but it's still the golden age, and it lasts 4,800 years. So the total amount of time that you're in the golden age is 9,600 years. And then you go through the descending silver and descending bronze, and then you go into the descending Kali Yuga, which is the absolute pits. And then you go into the ascending Kali Yuga again, the one we just emerged from. Now, Yuktesvar's calculations based on the yugas there place a great year, which is a complete cycle, up and down completely, and to start over again. That places a great year at 24,000 years long. This is just ever so slightly off what we now know to be our great year relative to our astronomical cycle relative to galactic center. Okay, now it takes us millions of years to go around the galaxy in a complete fashion. But a great year going through the astrological chart, if each degree is marked at 30 degrees, or if each house of the 12 houses are marked at, or 13 even, are marked at 30 degrees, you get a great year that comes out to 25,477 years, right? So Yuktesvar was only off on his calculations by 1,477 years. Not bad. Now, he did his work, and then he predicted from his work that the next stage, the next leap in human ingenuity as a result of getting more emanations from galactic center. He didn't know about that part, right? He didn't know about the sinusoidal orbit or the more emanations from galactic center, but he had a presupposition that as we rose up, our intellect would increase and so on. And he predicted ahead of its arrival that we would have atomic theory, as he described it, working in very, very fine particles, and that we would have electrified civilizations. He knew about electricity, but at the time it was basically crude battery technology in the form of Leyden jars and so forth, right? Capacitors, glass capacitors and discharges, not flowing electricity. And then he made other predictions about both micro and macro sensory enhancement. So in other words, he was predicting the gradual use of, and also these in an energetic fashion based on the microparticle, on the very fine particles. And he was talking about microscopes and telescopes, and being able to have giant views of things, right? So he had predictions based on his work as to what would be invented in a short period of time after we got through this particular beginning of the transition period that he was living ahead of, right? Anyway, so there's this math that goes along with the yugas and the prediction, and the transition period and so on, and based on that particular part of the math, you can get a confirmatory hint out of human activity that we are in fact in the 326th year, or 325th year, beginning in 1700. We're in the 325th year of the ascending Bronze Age, and we've just left a particular point in the transition. Now, okay, so Jason Georgiani didn't understand yugas from that viewpoint. If you looked at it from that viewpoint, then the intermittent collisions of human society rising up and down through these yugas with expected environmental catastrophe kind of stuff would naturally tend to, embed artifacts in coal, that sort of thing. It's not at all a stretch to envision this occurring. And then he does not understand time at an appropriate level. He's never done energy math requirements on what would be required to shove matter through time. Okay, and then you have to start understanding what we're talking about here as well. Because when everybody says like time travel, like going backward or forward in time, you have to understand that in our reality, in our physicality here, most of the conversations about time are really talking about duration. Okay, now time travel supposedly would have you be in one calendar year, day, month, whatever, and be able to exit that year and go back in time, go to a past previous age that had come and gone. The hand that writes can't unwrite, or it would go into the future. Now, this understanding of time is flawed. Okay, time does not work that way and can't work that way for a number of philosophical reasons, but also for a number of very practical energy reasons. So time travel does not function or can't exist in the sense of sending humans back and forth, or really probably any form of life, because that life would be frequency dependent. Okay, this is one practical reason that it can't happen. So if you were to send a modern human back in, well, okay, all right, I've got to preface this. All right, so in the ontological model, universe creates everything by a pulse. That pulse happens 22 trillion times a second, and the pause is also happens 22 trillion times a second, but it has no duration. So fundamentally, you're dividing this second up into 22 trillion chunks, but there is a pause between each pulse. It is simply has no time involved in it. It has no duration. It doesn't contribute to duration at all. Okay, that's the void that Jason Giorgiani, this is a function of magnetism. It creates a particular, we can think of magnetism as having two aspects, the glom together and then the push it apart aspects of magnetism. And this works on a fundamental proto-crystal etheric level. So that's what happens 22 trillion times a second. So there is no bending of space-time. Einstein's totally wrong. These UFOs do not travel by bending space or time or trying to distort it in any way like that. What they do is they travel with this pulse on a particular frequency band as it moves, right? So it's basically what they're doing is sailing on the ether as part of that etheric band or wavelength or frequency. And you can think of it as what they do is they disconnect from the frequency of the reality at this instant and then reconnect in another instant, but because they disconnected at a particular frequency, they rode that frequency and used it as the transport media. So basically, they're blinking in and out of reality. They're fluxing in and out of reality in order to move. And then they're just, if you want to think about it this way, they're sort of dialing a new location, and they appear at that new location without the bother of having to travel between the 2 points. They're just, at point 000A in 1 millisecond, and then the next 22 trillionth part of a second when they reappear, there's some distance off at another location, at another point of etheric discrimination. These points can be thought of as the nexus around which matter exists. Anyway, so time has many aspects to it. Time imparts energy into our universe through these magnetic pulses 22 trillion times a second, and then blowing the universe apart. It has a particular graphic sine wave shape. The both halves of the magnetism, the agglutination, the glomming together part, and then the explosive part form a particular shape that we see appearing in, like oscilloscopes, as mundane as that quite frequently. This pulsed hesitation and then renewal of the energy, right? Anyway, that time we can think of as time in all caps. That imparts impulse into universe, and from impulse, all other forms of energy evolve or discriminate. They discriminate because what happens in universe is as the time pulse recreates us all, thereafter we fade, so to speak. Our frequencies change as we interact with this the materium here, and they become altered, and thus we end up with all of these other forms of energy that discriminate themselves from the pulse. And this would include, radioactivity, electricity, sunlight, all of these things, motion, all of these kind of things. In fact, in your body, it's all pulses, everything from the beat of the heart through the functioning of the formation of thoughts, how your muscles work, their fast twitch. Well, a twitch is a result of a pulse, or slow twitch, that kind of thing, right? Okay, so the nature of time can be thought of in a couple of different ways, as the impetus for reality's creation, as well as our perception of that impetus, the leftover energy of that impetus, as duration. And because it's happening at 22 trillion times a second, it tricks our minds into thinking that solid reality exists around us, because our sensory apparatus within our body does not work that fast. So we stick out our hand and it doesn't hit the void. It doesn't go into one of those voids in the gap between the pulses. It hits the pulse, pushing back on it, making you think that is solid matter. And in other discussions, we can get about to discussing how that affects the idea of ki or chi energy, prana, anime, life force, however you want to term it, and such things as martial arts and psychic abilities of all kinds. Okay, this is a fundamental nature of how that occurs, is within that pulse, that you harmonize with the energy and thus can do things that others cannot. You have to be trained in order to do that, and you have to train your body and mind to harmonize and basically give you the ability to do these things, right? So anyway, Giorgiani has good ideas, but he's a little wacko on this idea of people going back in time and so on. He also doesn't understand the nature of the Elohim and religious writings at the level of them all being space aliens, although he does grant that there is that level of intrusion in human understanding of things. But one of the things he was discussing was the reverse engineered craft, Lockheed Martin, holes in the ground. Maybe he mentioned some other company. I don't recall that he did, but nonetheless, Lockheed Martin and a big hole in the ground and reverse engineered UFOs, and trying to train pilots to fly them. And this was what caught my attention, because he's obviously not aware of. Hang on a second. Not aware of the mind-machine interface aspect of ancient literature. Anyway, so in this, in his understanding, the time distortion that these pilots were going through, he thought of these machines as being time travel. Okay, and that was his big thing to the interviewer, where he was saying, no, you can't have this technology go out and about and get in Joe and Bob's garage, because basically it's a time machine. And it is a time machine in the sense that what it does is it travels on the pulse in a way that is not related to duration, but it's not a time machine in the sense that you can be in one calendar year and go to another calendar year using this device. Okay, so his use of language was not particularly suited. I think he should have defined all of his terms ahead of discussing it, because in doing so, you actually can qualify your thinking about what's going on. Thus, grammar, understanding exactly what each word means, just arriving that with yourself in exploring new ideas can help you center on what's important and get right to it, that sort of thing. Anyway, so he had this idea that these machines were, and it supported his idea about the yugas. He thought the yugas were too long to exist, which he's correct. Yuktesvar proved that. And there's all kinds of other proof, which I can get into. But he thought that these machines were time traveling in a sense that they would move you from one calendar year to another, or a day or whatever, right? In the process of moving you physically. What he didn't grasp was that the time distortion that these corporations are dealing with is not time dilation, and it's not time acceleration. It is a distortion within the human being, not the time. Okay, yes. So basically, these devices travel outside of time. They do not travel within time. Okay, so they don't travel within the calendar. When they're moving, they are not within the same reality as us. When they appear and come back, we may see some residual movement from the fact that they're just sort of popping in and have some aspect of momentum along there. But and they may do it in short bursts so that you don't have them totally disappear from your reality completely and then show up on the other side of the planet, that kind of thing, where you wouldn't observe them. But rather they use the same impulse form of travel, which derives from the pulse, that is basically time that creates our reality. They use that to even do local travel. Okay, so now that's what is distorting the human perception. And it's easy to understand for us guys that have been reading in this old literature because of the nature of how humans conceive of and interact with time at a corporeal, biological level. We have within us the pineal gland and circulating melanin. Okay, the pineal gland is incredibly dark. It's the black hole. It's right next to it's close to the seat of consciousness, and it is greatly influencing of all aspects of your life. But a lot of people don't understand this kind of stuff about the pineal gland. So let's get into it real quick. If you were a yogi, you would get up in the morning and do sun gazing, and then at night you would do, as the sun is setting, you'd do sun gazing again. That's resetting your pineal gland. That's putting a marker in the pineal gland, a very strong marker, because your pineal gland maintains a 365-day calendar of where light is in relation to your body. This is what accounts for jet lag. Okay, it's not you're going over time zones and stuff. It's that your pineal gland gets screwed up relative to the angle of the light appearing, and the time and the amount of light and the frequency of the light, because there's different frequencies coming from the sun at different times in the day. And so it screws up your sensory apparatus, and your pineal gland loses its way relative to where you are and when you are in terms of how it is structured. And so when you go traveling and you have the jet lag, people will take melatonin, which floods their pineal gland, like taking and hosing the calendar right off the wall with a giant fire hose. And that sort of alleviates a little bit of the problems, but it'll take them months to rebuild that calendar, right? It's very damaging to take melatonin supplements because of this effect, and it doesn't really aid the jet lag. There's other ways to deal with that. One of them is this sun gazing thing. It's very no sunglasses or anything, and you just stare at the rising sun for a few minutes, and then stare at the rising sun as it, or the setting sun. But you need to make sure you got adequate vitamin A, etc., and your eyes are good, right? But yogis do it. It's a huge it's a huge mechanism, very powerful tool for resetting all kinds of aspects of your body, especially if you get ill. Like, you have some bacteria and stuff that will make you ill in such a way that your pineal gland gets affected because your sensory apparatus is affected. All of the... I won't go into that. Okay, so I don't want to get too diverted. Anyway, so you can reset your pineal gland and stuff by these capabilities by sun gazing, right? This is a way that you can relocate your body in time and reset it in time. Because mostly we see and record duration by the way the pineal gland interacts with these sensors in our body, okay? So what these pilots, in my supposition, in my conjecture, because I haven't been there, I have not talked to any of these guys, but what these guys are likely to be experiencing is time distortion causing something akin to the impact on the pineal gland of jet travel, only all in an instant and with no duration involved at all, and that the magnitude of the impact of this distortion would be quite incredible indeed. So imagine this. You're going to fly. Let's just take a mild example, okay? Here it is, a mild example. You live on the West Coast, and it's noon, and you're going to fly to Hawaii out of, let's see, I think it's Seattle that's closest. So you'd fly out of Seattle to Hawaii, and that's a 5.5 hour flight. And so the time involved in getting there is is felt as duration in your body. Takes amount of it has its own level of duration. It takes a certain toll on your body in terms of the light shifting and so on. And then you get to this location where you're not that far from your original light setting relative to your pineal gland, but the angles are all wrong, right? And the intensity of the light for that time of day, because you're racing against the sun. So when you get out of the enclosed blue light dominated, darkened mostly airplane and come out into the light in Hawaii, you get hit with a lot of frequency you're not used to in terms of sunlight, and it's coming at an angle you're not used to, and your pineal gland is basically saying, what the fuck, dude? What's going on here? And then you get into jet lag. And that's only on like 5.5 hours. Now imagine that occurring, flying from Seattle to Sydney, right? Australia, flying to Australia. And I think that flight is like 17 hours or something outrageous, just like grueling as far as I'm concerned. So that same effect occurs in Australia, but you've also got the hemispheric change, which to some degree you have with flying from Seattle to Hawaii, because you've got to go south and you're going to cross lines of latitude, and it is in crossing these lines of latitude that you get different layers of magnetic and electrical magnetic influence from the planet on you, and that also impacts the pineal gland, because melanin, circulating melanin, is magnetically sensitive material. And also the stationary melanin within the pineal gland is magnetically sensitive. We don't know how it stores, for instance, the calendar. There's been no understanding at all on how circulating melanin makes impacts on standing melanin. It gets really complex, but basically we have to keep coming back to, we don't know, okay? Anyway, so now imagine doing that same thing in one of these saucers or one of these devices, these Tic Tacs or whatever. So you're here. It's noon, and then you instantly jump to Hawaii. Now, there's a couple of issues here. One thing we haven't mentioned. Okay, so sorry about that. I forget about it, but of course it's easy to forget about it. It's the EPN, right? The ever-present now. So time, the pulse, moves at 22 trillion times a second and recreates our whole materium, what we can think of as our whole universe. Boom, it just happens, right? It happens 22 trillion times a second. If you were to grab onto one part of the pulse, so to speak, and travel with it in that 1/22 trillionth part of a second and go to some other distant galaxy, you would still be within the same now as when you left. So your pineal gland would still register that you're in that same moment of time as you go from one moment of duration into the next. And this is the ever-present now. And we need to discuss the ever-present now. We need to discuss the effect on the brain and on your conscious mind as well as your consciousness, because it contributes to your experience of consciousness, of your own consciousness, this ever-present now. Okay, so here's the thing. When you do this, when you fly in a regular jet from Seattle to Hawaii or from Seattle to Australia, you're taking your ever-present now with you. Okay, you're flying in what we can think of as real time, what we can also think of as real, quotes, duration time. Okay, so in other words, felt perceived duration as an aspect of time, one of the quantifiers, one of the qualifiers. Okay, so you take that ever-present now with you, but in these devices you don't. Okay, you skip the ever-present now and appear in another place in that same instant. All right, that other place may be 5 feet ahead of you, or it may be on the other side of the galaxy. Distance does not appear to be an issue in using these devices to ride this pulse and skip the intervening ever present now impulse perception in the process of traveling. I hope that made sense. Okay, so they travel around or beyond time. They travel in a durational space that in no space of no duration. The duration is not being perceived by the bodies of the pilots, and thus their pineal gland is like wackadoodle. It's pig shit everywhere and doesn't make any sense at all and can't smell anything other than the pig shit that it just does not work. And so this is what this time distortion is doing to them. It is a total disconnect of their durational sensitive equipment of their body from the transition of time, and so in that sense, they are disconnecting themselves from reality for a period of no duration, and then when they reconnect to reality, they are in a different location, and their sensory apparatus cannot deal with that level of change, can't deal with that process on any number of levels, but at a primary level, it is the temporal effect that is most perceived and most damaging to their personalities. And you also have to understand that there's a lot to suggest that done badly, there's also physical effects, right? So if you do this shit badly, you can get into the wrong side of damage your body. But assuming that it wasn't any of those kind of issues, that it was just the temporal distortion that had brought this issue up to Jason's attention, and he was approaching it from a philosophical understanding. Their understanding of time is flawed, and they're not seeing it as Kozyrev sees it, for instance. And so they don't see that time, the pulse has density, has a level of flow, affects the ether, and thus also affects our bodies in ways that we are not perceptibly aware, but also not necessarily intellectually aware. So, in this old literature, in this ancient literature from which we're deriving this mind-to-machine interface view of these aliens, they took great pains and had all kinds of restrictions and constraints on the diets of the humans that they used to plug into their machinery to then go zipping about space, because they didn't want to use the devices on themselves. And in fact, there are some hints. I won't go into the history, the provenance of it, but there are some hints in some literature that the rebellion that forced El Elyon, the head Elohim, to agree to the GMOing of humans and introduction of humans into their labor force, the rebellion that took place from these lower caste level Elohim that refused to continue was that they were rebelling against the damage that was being done to them by running all this equipment, by connecting into these devices, because it affected their bodies in disharmonious ways. Much more so than us, I guess, because of the fact that they had blood that was apparently dually valent, because it was not only iron-based but also copper-based. Anyway, so the time component of this that is impacting these pilots within the corporations that are using the reverse engineered stuff, these guys are not going to get anywhere. The corporations, the management, are not going to get anywhere in training these humans by trying to desensitize them or other psychological tools to what's going on, because these humans are getting a very major effect on biological systems that in the main have not been studied by our modern biologists, because up to this point there hadn't been any need, quite frankly. But most physiologists, even neurologists, well, certainly no psychologists or psychiatrists will ever talk to you about circulating melanin and those kind of issues. They're probably totally unaware that there is a circulating melanin system within the human body. Most doctors don't have a clue. And, they have some vague understanding of the pineal gland, but that's really it. It's very vague, and they don't understand that it's just the capper, so to speak, or the storage unit to yet another sensory apparatus within the body. That is also because it is melanin, and of course the melanin has a ferritin component to it. It is magnetically sensitive. Anyway, okay, so those are some of the issues here with the time distortion in our poor grammar relative to time leads to these errors in logic, such as Jason Georgiani was, such as what he was proposing, that it was all time travel that was the responsible for these out-of-place artifacts, which, and also, by the way, he needs to understand and read synergetics, read Buckminster Fuller, and get the idea that when you propose, or Vernadsky, and read Biosphere, but when you propose ideas like this, they're very easy to check just by doing some simple energy equations, right? What is the amount of energy required to shove 1 gram of living matter 1 second ahead or back in time and have it still survive? And would it survive? Would it still be alive? And so on, right? I think that's really it. And we're going to get a lot of dog barks here. And I'm going to get my interruptions. I wanted to get this in ahead of that. So not too long, hopefully. And so remember, reset yourself with sun gazing if you're doing travel with or without using these UFOs, right? I actually think that there are ways that the corporations could approach this. A different paradigm would naturally suggest certain remedies that can be used ahead of time. So, it's like, I won't go into that, but there are ways that you could deal with this within the human body. Anyway, take care, guys. The aliens will be popping up again pretty soon. They're pesky that way. Just at the most inconvenient times. Hey, there they are.
Good morning, one and all. What's really weird about, well, I wouldn't say weird. It's a massive coincidence. the end of that song had us singing, "Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom." Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. There is freedom. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. There is freedom. There is freedom. And yesterday, on my Instagram page, I noticed that you could put like a note or like a thought right above your profile picture, and it's basically just like a, this is what's on my mind type thing. And I wrote freedom. Freedom, because that word rings bells in heaven and on earth.